The separation of mind and body is true only in theory. Right? These are not two separate things, but rather two integrated parts. But this separation of body and mind often is the core of a lot of the problems we faced when our mind starts to create problems in our body. In this video, I want to introduce to you what I think is the most effective tool. It's what I teach almost all of my clients to help them combat the negative effects that their mind can have on their body. I call this the state story pendulum. Right? When we think of the body and the mind, right, the physiology, the psychology, or the state and the story, what we want to kind of understand is that these two sides feed off each other. Right? It then kind of opens up the opportunity that we can use one to impact the other. If we think about it very simply, right, we tell a different story depending on the state that we're in. Right? When we're in a state of fear, of anxiety, of overwhelm, we will tend to tell stories, right, that reflect that underlying state. It's very hard to think positive when your nervous system is perceiving threat, stress, fear, right? When I'm in a state of vigilance and threat detection, my mind is not designed to be optimistic, to be carefree, right? To be happy. And so when we can actually work to change our physiology or the underlying state, we can have far more influence over our mind, right? This is really down to neurophysiology, right? What is happening in the brain? And I want to take a moment just to explain to you exactly how this works. So instead of this video being me telling you what to do, it's you understanding exactly how this works in your own life. Because when you take that understanding, you'll see how effective this tool can be and how many opportunities you have to introduce it. So let's introduce the two main players here in our brain. The prefrontal cortex, which is kind of just behind the forehead. This is the part of the brain responsible for decision making, logic, reasoning, and essentially the kind of coordination of other areas of the brain. Evolutionarily, it's more of a new part of the brain, right? It's where we kind of process our moment-to-moment input from our surroundings, right? What's happening out there, what's happening in here. And it's also very involved in kind of inhibiting certain responses. I want you to think of the prefrontal cortex more or less like the adult in the room. Now, the second player here is the amygdala, right? The amygdala is kind of in the middle of the brain. It's a big part of the limbic system. It's a major processing center for our emotions, and it's responsible for our fears, our memories, and our behaviors. It's also a big part of the autonomic nervous system, right? And this is why working with someone on their emotional state, right, the energy behind their emotions is far more effective than trying to work with them on their thoughts, right? Now, when we're in a state of high arousal, we also can just call this stress, right? Anxious, overwhelmed, fearful, apprehensive. We actually move from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala, right? The adult in the room stops talking to the scared child, right? Think of the amygdala like the scared child. The example I often give to my clients, right? The amygdala, the scared child, might think there's a monster under the bed, right? What do they need in that moment? They need the adult in the room to come in and look under the bed and check the closet, right? Show them that there's no monster. The amygdala it can be triggered, right? And we kind of hear this thing of emotional hijacking, right? It's really our responses are being controlled by the amygdala, right? It's really important that we understand that when we're in that state of stress, when we're in that state of arousal, we kind of sever that connection between the prefrontal cortex, the adult in the room, my logic, my reasoning, my thinking, and the scared child, right? Now we've just got a scared child running rampant. So how does this play out in your life, right? And in the lives of all humans? When the scared child starts telling a story, right? I'm not good enough. I'm never going to get better. I'm always going to be in pain. I always fail, right? The natural tendency that we have is to try and go into this story and tell a different story, right? But because the story is dependent on the state, if we don't first address the underlying state, right, then we're not entering into that conversation as the adult in the room. We're entering into that conversation as a scared child. So now we have a scared child trying to convince a scared child, right? And this is just not effective, right? Stress or emotional arousal impairs that function of the prefrontal cortex and its ability to control the amygdala, right? What we need to do in this scenario is re-engage the adult in the room, right? And the way we do this is by kind of de-escalating the nervous system, right? Think of stress that kind of escalates my response and my ability to de-escalate being really important. And this is where I want to introduce the impact that breathwork can have. Now, I don't mean going and laying down and doing deep breathing for 30 minutes. That's not what we're talking about. I mean the intentional use of my breath to change my state, which influences my story. Right? We can manage our body to influence our mind. We can use our physiology to change our psychology. We can change our state to change our story. So, when we notice we're telling an unhelpful story, the first thing we have to do is recognize this is my amygdala. It likes to conjure up the fears, the worst case scenarios, the what could goes wrong, right? This is the scared child. And what we have to do in that moment is not engage in that story. We have to swing the pendulum over from our mind to our body, from the story to our state. And the first thing we have to do is notice, right? We might not be breathing at all. A common presentation is, whilst I'm thinking those scary thoughts, I'm actually holding my breath, right? Or I'm tense, or my breathing is erratic, or I'm clenching my jaw, right? This is the driver of our state, which is influencing the story that we're telling, right? What we want to do in this moment, right? We've swung our attention back to the body. We've noticed a couple of things. The first thing we're going to do is let out a big sigh of relief. We're going to shake it off, right? So we're just kind of taking a moment to kind of ground ourselves in the body. Key point here is we're now going to exhale rather than inhale. So we're going to blow the air out of the lungs and then allow a soft, slow, but full inhale to kind of fall in and fill the lungs. Right? It's not effortful. I'm not taking a deep breath. I'm allowing a full breath. I pause, and then as I exhale, I really intentionally relax my forehead, my jaw, my shoulders, any parts of the body that I noticed, right, were tense or that I was holding. Some people it's the pelvic floor. Some people it's the palms of their hands. It could be the abdomen, right? So I take that easy full inhale, I pause, and as I exhale, I soften. I really like to think of getting gooey, right? As I exhale, I just get all soft and gooey. Again, I exhale, I empty the air from the lungs. I let a soft, slow, but full breath fall in. Take a little pause, and then I intentionally relax as I exhale. Right? When I do this just 2 or 3 times, right, what it is doing is redirecting the nervous system. Imagine we're kind of pushing a boat out into the water, right? We're setting it in a certain course. That is what we're doing to our nervous system in this moment, right? So we swing the pendulum to the body, we redirect, we course correct our state, right? We de-escalate the stress response. What this does brings the prefrontal cortex back online, right? We move away from that scared child and we bring the adult in the room back into the conversation. We swing the pendulum back to the mind. What story am I telling, right? And I like to go to step 2 here. Is this a fear or is this a fact, right? And if you can't call this a fact, you have to label it a fear. So when I say I'm never going to get better, I'm always going to be in pain, I'm always going to fail, this is not a factual statement, right? You don't have evidence, right, that this is how it's all going to be. So this is a fear. Label it a fear, right? The adult in the room has come in and said, actually, that's a fear, it's not a fact. We swing the pendulum back and forth, right, back to the body, sigh, soften, breathe intentionally, set the tone for the nervous system, come back to the story. And in this way, we can kind of diminish the impact that that story has. We think, on average, 30 to 50,000 thoughts a day. And the majority of those thoughts have a negative bias to them, right? But most people don't notice the impact that their thoughts or their story are having on their body or their state, right? And now this vicious cycle starts because when my body is in that state, right, of stress, of overwhelm, or fear, it generates that level of thinking. That thinking triggers a state in my body and we spiral, right? So this state story pendulum is an incredibly effective way to pattern interrupt, right? Is to catch, wait, I'm telling a story right now. I'm not good enough. It's too hard. I can never do these things, right? I catch that story, I swing my attention over to my state. What's going on? What's generating this story? Oh, I'm holding my breath, right? Or I'm tensing, or I'm breathing really erratically. Set the tone for your nervous system. Sigh, soften, breathe with intention. Back to the story, now you're adult in the room, right? Is this a fear? Is this a fact? What other or alternative story can I tell here? What evidence do I have from my past to suggest that this is a story that I'm telling, right? That it is not factual. And so we might need to swing this pendulum a couple of times before the power, right, of that story is diminished. And to be transparent, you might need to swing that pendulum again in 10 minutes because you catch another story, right? The key here is every time your thoughts start to interrupt your body as you catch them and you do something about it, right? We course correct, we course correct, we course correct. And in doing that consistently, you fundamentally change, right, the state of your body, which is what is in charge of how you feel, what you think, and how you act, right? So this state story pendulum is a tool, right, that can be used whenever the opportunity arises. And trust me when I tell you, the opportunity is there, and it is there very, very often. So if you are someone that finds yourself trapped in certain negative stories, limiting beliefs, right, dealing with chronic health issues, then this may well be an incredibly impactful tool that you can start to introduce and you can use from today. The more you use it, the more impactful it will be. Right? I use it myself and I teach it to all my clients, and I know how effective it can be. Right? So you now have the tool. The question is, are you going to go and use it? I encourage you to do so. If you need additional support, comment below, send me a message, but take this and use it.